A farmer is about to lose his land at Duchy of Cornwall estate until Prince William arrives with a plan. The sky hung low and grey over Bell Farm, pressing against the hills like a heavy blanket. The trees lining the property swayed gently, still bare from the harsh winter, their branches whispering secrets to the wind. Everything about the morning felt still, except for the pounding in Thomas Bell's chest. He stood on the edge of his field, thick boots planted deep in the soil he'd worked for more than 3 decades. His flannel shirt, worn thin at the elbows, fluttered in the breeze as he faced the man standing opposite him. A crisp-suited representative from the Duchy of Cornwall, holding a leather briefcase and a clipboard that seemed far too clean for this place. "I'm afraid the lease will not be renewed, Mr. Bell," the man said flatly. "As of the end of this quarter, the land will revert to Duchy control for a new development initiative." Thomas didn't speak right away. His jaw clenched as he looked past the man to the small white farmhouse in the distance, where smoke curled gently from the chimney and a little girl's drawing flapped against the kitchen window. "This land has been in my hands for 35 years, Thomas finally said. His voice was thick with emotion he tried desperately to suppress. "I raised my daughter here, buried my wife under that apple tree out back." The man shifted uncomfortably. "We appreciate the sentiment, but as you know, the Duchy owns the estate. The decision has been made to reallocate the property for an ecological expansion. A sustainable project, really jobs, tourism, a net benefit to the community." Thomas took a breath, steadying himself. "A benefit to who?" he asked quietly. "Certainly not to my daughter. Not to me. I understand this is difficult." "No," Thomas interrupted, his voice suddenly sharp. "You don't understand. You don't know what it's like to look a child in the eye and not know where you're going to sleep come autumn. To stand on the soil your wife chose to rest beneath and be told it's just gas, reallocation." The man blinked. "Mr. Bell, I'm only here to communicate the decision. You'll be given 60 days to vacate. I suggest you begin preparing now." Thomas felt the world tilt slightly beneath his feet. He was a proud man, not one for begging, but a storm was gathering inside him, a sense of loss deeper than he'd known since the day cancer took Mary. "I have nowhere to go," he murmured. The representative gave a nod, almost mechanical. "There are relocation assistance options available. I've left the packet with you." He turned, briefcase snapping shut, and walked briskly toward his silver car parked by the gate. Thomas stood alone now. The breeze picked up again. From the house came the sound of a screen door creaking open. "Daddy," a small voice called. He turned and saw his daughter, Elsie, 7 years old, barefoot and clutching a crumpled piece of paper. Her hair was still messy from sleep, and her favorite yellow cardigan hung off one shoulder. She ran up to him, holding up her drawing proudly. "I drew our house with the flower garden," she said. "And the goats and the tire swing. Do you think we can plant strawberries this year too?" Thomas stared down at the drawing. Crayon lines marked out the barn, the big oak tree, the outline of a smiling sun in the corner. "Sweetheart," he began, crouching down. "There's something I need to." "Where are we going to live next?" she interrupted, blinking up at him with eyes far too wise for her age. He froze. Elsa's lip quivered. "Are we going to have a house again?" Before he could answer, the distant sound of tires crunching on gravel interrupted the moment. They both turned. A dark green Land Rover Defender appeared on the dirt road, making its way slowly up the long drive. There was no flag, no escort, no press, just one vehicle, its headlights soft in the morning haze. Thomas squinted as the door opened, and then he blinked twice. The man who stepped out wore brown boots, dark jeans, and a navy quilted jacket. He walked with purpose but without grandeur, no aids, no fanfare. It was Prince William. He smiled gently as he approached the pair. "Mr. Bell?" he asked, his voice low and respectful. Thomas stood up slowly. "Yes, sir?" "I heard about your situation," William continued, extending a hand. "I came to see it for myself." Thomas stared at the outstretched hand, then slowly took it, his callous fingers rough against the prince's. "I wasn't expecting royalty today," he muttered. William gave a small smile. "Good. I didn't come as royalty." He glanced down at Elsie, who had gone wide-eyed and very still. "And who's this?" "This is my daughter, Elsie." William crouched slightly to meet her eyes. "Hello, Elsie. That's a beautiful drawing you've made." She held it out wordlessly. He accepted it with care, studying the crooked little house and garden. "This place means a lot to you, doesn't it?" he asked gently. Elsie nodded. William looked back up at Thomas. "Do you mind showing me around a bit?" Thomas hesitated, then nodded. They walked together across the field, past the barn that Thomas had rebuilt by hand after a storm 5 years ago, past the chicken coop that Elsie painted with bright blue stars, past the small headstone beneath the apple tree that read, Mary Bell, 1963 to 2016. Loved fiercely, laughed freely, rested here. William paused there respectfully, lowering his head. He said nothing, but Thomas noticed the way he stood, still, silent, honoring. They continued walking. After a while, William turned to him. Mr. Bell, he said, I've seen many estates, many tenants. But this isn't just a piece of land. It's a living story. Thomas felt his throat tighten. I know what the plans say, William added. But plans can be changed. Thomas stared at him. What do you mean? William looked out at the field, where Elsie was chasing a chicken, laughing. I mean, he said, perhaps it's time we rethink what development really means. And with that, he smiled again. It was not the smile of a prince. It was the smile of a man who had come to listen, and possibly, just possibly, to stay. The old stable smelled of straw, damp earth, and... Sure, here's your text with proper punctuation, spacing, and formatting, while keeping everything else exactly the same. Memory. Dust floated in sunbeams that slipped through broken slats in the wooden roof. A faded halter still hung on one wall, untouched in years, while an old feed bucket sat upside down in the corner. It was a place long retired from its original use, yet somehow more alive than any boardroom or office. Prince William leaned against a wooden post, his arms folded comfortably. Thomas stood opposite him, his hands in his pockets, his boots caked in the soil of decades. It's been a while since I stood in here, William said, glancing around. Thomas managed a small chuckle. 15 years, give or take. You came here as a university lad with a notebook and boots that still had tags on M. William smiled. And you gave me hell for walking across a freshly seeded row. You still owe me half a crop, Thomas said, eyes twinkling, before his face softened again. The smile faded, replaced by the quiet weight that had hung on his shoulders since the man from the Duchy came. They stood in silence for a moment, each man letting the stillness settle. Then William spoke gently. Tell me the rest of your story. Thomas looked down, thumb rubbing a groove in the wood beside him. I met Mary when I was 23. She was studying ecology. Came to volunteer with a hydro restoration group. Smartest woman I'd ever met. Fierce too. Made me rethink everything I thought I knew about this land. He paused. We married 2 years later. Bought chickens before we bought a wedding cake. She's the one who planted the orchard, said trees were the best promise we could leave behind. William nodded silently. When Elsie was born, Mary barely made it through the birth. And when she got sick, we fought. Together we thought we'd beat it. But cancer doesn't listen. His voice cracked. I buried her under that apple tree she planted on our first anniversary. She made me promise before she went. He looked up at William now, his eyes full of something between fire and sorrow. She said, Don't leave me alone here, Tom. This land, it's where I lived. I wanted to be where you keep living. A long pause. I told her I wouldn't go. I promised. And I meant it. William's voice was low. I believe you. Thomas took a long breath. Then the pandemic came. I nearly lost the farm twice. No help, no buyers. But I held on, not because of pride, but because this land fed more than my daughter. It fed the soul of this place. My neighbors, the kids down the road who came to see lambs born in spring. William looked around the stable. No one ever sees this part of the duchy, he murmured. We see maps, revenue sheets, proposals on polished tables. But this is what matters. He stepped forward. If you had the power to decide, Thomas, if the decision was yours, what would you do to save this place? Thomas looked at him, surprised. I mean it, William added. What would you do to keep this land alive without losing what it is? Thomas didn't answer right away. Instead, he walked to an old tack box in the corner. He knelt, brushed off the dust, and opened it with a creak. Inside was a weathered wooden box, beautifully carved, the kind that held something sacred. He opened the lid. Inside, laid carefully on top of yellowed fabric, was a thick bundle of hand-drawn plans. Notes in fading blue ink, sketches of irrigation systems, crop rotation charts, diagrams of solar greenhouses, and even simple marketing ideas written in the margins. He placed the bundle in William's hands. This, Thomas said, is what I dreamed of doing 10 years ago. I wrote it all down, showed it to the last estate manager. He glanced at the first page and said, Nice drawings, but you're not an economist. William unfolded the first page. The title read, Bell Farm Sustainable Model, Feeding Soil, Families, and the Future. Thomas pointed to a section. Crop-sharing co-ops with nearby schools, local compost systems, free veggie boxes for low-income households, workshops for kids on how to grow things with their own hands. William turned the pages slowly, reverently. I didn't just want to keep the land, Thomas said, voice trembling. I wanted it to give. To be something no developer could replicate. A place rooted in people, not profit. He looked at William, eyes glistening. I don't need charity. I need belief. William said nothing. He simply stood there, holding the pages, absorbing every word, every drawing, every ounce of passion scribbled onto those 10-year-old dreams. Finally, he looked up. Thomas, he said softly, you've just handed me the most valuable proposal I've seen all year. Thomas blinked. I can't promise a miracle, but I can promise this. I will take this seriously. I will walk it into the rooms that need to see it. And I won't let them forget who wrote it. For the first time in weeks, Thomas felt something crack open in his chest. It wasn't hope. Not yet. But it was something close. I never thought anyone would read it, he whispered. William smiled, folding the pages with care. Well, he said, you gave it to the right reader. And with that, they walked out of the stable together. Two men, two different lives. But for the first time, bound by the same purpose, to save something worth saving. Not just a farm, but a future. 3 days later, the boardroom inside the Duchy of Cornwall's estate headquarters had never felt tenser. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked rolling green hills, the very land that now stood at the center of a quiet storm. Around the long oak table sat 12 members of the estate's executive committee, lawyers, advisors, estate developers, and senior managers. Each had a folder in front of them labeled, Bell Farm Proposal, Community Sustainable Pilot. At the head of the table stood Prince William, not in royal regalia, but in a navy suit and open-collared shirt. His expression was calm but resolute. I appreciate you all coming on such short notice, he began. This meeting is outside the regular quarterly schedule because the situation calls for it. He picked up a folder, opened it to the first page, and lifted a single piece of paper. Thomas Bell's hand-drawn farm layout. This isn't just about one tenant. It's about how we, as stewards of this land, define progressive few. Eyebrows lifted. One committee member, a senior estate planner named Harrove, cleared his throat. Your Royal Highness, with all due respect, the Eco-Lodge expansion has already received preliminary approvals. Backing out now sends a conflicting message to our partners, especially after 3 years of strategic development planning. William nodded, acknowledging the concern. And yet, despite years of planning, we never set foot on the farm to ask what it meant to the people who lived there. We never saw the orchard where a wife was buried. We never listened to the vision of the man who's worked that soil for 35 years. He gestured to the pages inside the folder. This is more than nostalgia. This is a model that combines organic agriculture, community partnerships, and educational programming. He walked slowly around the room. Thomas Bell's plan proposes crop sharing with local schools, seasonal education tours, and youth garden plots for underprivileged communities. He's suggesting that we turn Bell Farm into a living, growing classroom, one that doesn't just feed bodies, but minds. He paused. I've added projections, he continued, with input from agronomists and educational consultants. If implemented properly, this farm could become the Duchy's flagship model of regenerative land use. The room was silent, tension bristling. Then Harrove spoke again. But we're not a charity. The Duchy has obligations. Revenue targets. William's voice softened. I understand that. But I also understand something else. Something my mother taught me when I was a boy planting saplings in our back garden. He turned to the window, then looked back at them. She used to say, real growth isn't measured in profit. It's measured in purpose. He held their gaze. We don't need to sacrifice memory to achieve progress. We need to redefine progress so it includes memory. Someone near the end of the table cleared their throat. And you believe the public will support this shift? I don't believe, William said. I know. He walked to the firewall where a staffer had placed a corkboard. On it, William had pinned something earlier that morning. Elsie's drawing, the same one she had handed him in the field. Crayon sketched, fragile but radiant with intention. The house, the goats, the apple tree. This, he said, pointing to it, is what Bell Farm looks like through the eyes of a child. He turned to face the room fully. And from this day forward, I intend to honor that vision because it reminds us that development isn't about what we add. It's about what we protect. The room was quiet again. Then slowly, one voice spoke. And what do you propose we do? William took a breath. I propose we approve this as a pilot program under the Duchy's Sustainability Directive. We call it a community agriculture and education hub. We pause all current development on the site for 18 months, and we give Thomas Bell the chance to implement his plan with our support. He held up the drawing again. And I propose we name it the Elsie Grow Ground, after the girl who saw the future more clearly than we did. There was a silence that felt less like resistance and more like reverence. No one spoke for several seconds. Then one by one, heads began to nod. Harrove at last closed his folder. I can support that, sir, he said quietly. Others followed. William gave a single nod. Then it settled. That evening, Thomas sat on his porch, the golden light of dusk spilling across the field. He watched Elsie play with the chickens, barefoot, arms wide like airplane wings. The road to the house rustled softly, and once again, a Land Rover came rolling up the drive. William stepped out. He handed Thomas an official envelope. You might want to frame this one, he said. Thomas opened it. Inside was the Duchy's official approval letter. At the top bolded, Pilot Program Approved, Community Agricultural Stewardship, Bell Farm. And beneath it, handwritten in blue ink. For Mary. For Elsie. For every root that never gave up. W. Thomas didn't speak. He simply nodded, his eyes full of tears he no longer felt ashamed to show. The sun sank lower, and somewhere under the apple tree, the earth seemed to breathe again. It was mid-April when the first daffodils began to bloom again along the fence line at Bell Farm. The orchard had awakened early this year. Apple blossoms, like whispers of pink and white, fluttered in the morning breeze. The soil, once anxious under the threat of departure, now seemed to breathe with peace. There were footprints everywhere now, but none of them were leaving. In just a few short months, the transformation had been nothing short of extraordinary. The small, quiet farm, once on the brink of eviction, had become something larger than itself, a living classroom, a community anchor, and the first officially recognized community agriculture hub in the Duchy of Cornwall's history. It started modestly. 3 raised beds built with the help of local volunteers. A greenhouse repaired by a retired engineer from the village. And a sign painted by children from the nearby primary school that read, Welcome to the Elsie Grow Ground, where roots and dreams are grown together. Local schools now visited twice a week. Children with muddy knees and wide eyes walked between rows of young lettuces, learning to identify herbs by smell and sketching the shapes of leaves in their notebooks. The laughter was loud, alive, spilling over into the fields like birdsong. And at the center of it all was Elsie. She had earned herself a new nickname among the teachers, the little guide in yellow. She wore the same faded cardigan every time school groups came by. It was the one her mother had knitted years ago. It barely fit now, but Elsie said it felt like armor. She led the groups from station to station, showing them where the bees liked to sleep, how to compost a carrot top. And always she stopped beneath the apple tree. This is where my mom rests, she'd say, pointing to the small stone beneath the blossoms. She was the first gardener here. My dad says everything started because of her. The children would fall silent, then nod. And then, without fail, Elsie would smile. But she would want us to keep planting. So let's go dig up some potatoes. Inside the farmhouse, Thomas Bell's mornings had changed too. He still rose before the sun. Still drank his tea from the same chipped mug. Still wore the same boots, with soles. Mended 3 times. But now there was a new rhythm to his days. No eviction letters, no dread, just the sound of goats, the scratching of pencils from the learning barn, and the voice of his daughter telling stories about compost like it was treasure. One particular morning, as mist curled low across the pasture and the kettle hissed on the stove, there was a knock at the door. Unusual. He wiped his hands on a towel and opened it. No one was there, just a single royal blue envelope resting on the step, bound in cream-colored ribbon and bearing the crest of Kensington Palace. His breath caught. He brought it inside, unwrapped it slowly. Inside was a sturdy flat box. He opened it, and there it was, Elsa's drawing, the one she'd given to Prince William that foggy morning months ago. The crayon sketch of their home, the barn, the tree, and the smiling sun. Now it had been professionally mounted, encased in glass and framed in warm cherrywood. Beneath it, in elegant cursive, was a handwritten inscription on parchment. Sometimes the smallest hands hold the biggest visions. Thomas stared at it for a long time. He sat down in his chair by the window, the frame resting on his lap, as Elsa's voice drifted in from outside. And if you put eggshells around your plants, the slugs won't eat them. He looked out at the land. The greenhouse now buzzed with life. The new seed shed, built by the town's old carpenter, stood proudly near the fence line. The Duchy had even installed solar panels on the barn roof, making it the first carbon-neutral farm site in the area. But beyond the buildings, beyond the paperwork and policy, Thomas saw something deeper. He saw roots, not just of crops but of community, not just of land but of legacy. He stood, walked to the fireplace, and hung the frame in the very center of the wall, right above Mary's photograph, right where every guest would see it. By early June, the Elsie Grow ground had become something of a local legend. It was featured quietly but proudly in the Duchess Sustainability Report that year. No pomp, just a page titled Where Growth Meets Grace, aka Study and Listening. Every Friday, Thomas sent a handwritten harvest note to the palace. Not required, not expected, just a quiet gesture of gratitude. Each week's note ended with the same line. We're still growing and still grateful. One morning in July, Elsie skipped into the kitchen holding a postcard. Look, Dad, she beamed. It's from him. On the back was a drawing, this time from Prince William himself. It showed a stick figure with messy hair planting a seed, and another small figure watering it beside him. The caption read, "You planted hope. She made it grow. Thank you both." Thomas placed it beside the framed drawing. And for a long while he just stood there, the early light painting the walls with gold. That summer, the farm's first open community day brought in more than 200 visitors from across the county. Parents, school teachers, even former tenants from other parts of the Duchy came to see what they'd only heard whispered about. When a local reporter asked Thomas what made the farm different from before, he smiled and said, "Before I farmed for survival. Now we grow things for joy. And when joy takes root, it never leaves." At sunset, as families packed picnic baskets and teachers gathered seedlings to take home, Thomas stood beneath the apple tree with Elsie. She held his hand tightly. "Do you think Mom's proud?" she asked softly. Thomas knelt beside her, placing his hand over hers. "She's blooming in every flower you planted," he said. "And every child you teach. That's more than pride, love. That's presence." Seasons passed. The soil deepened. The orchard flourished. And no one had to leave. Because now Bell Farm wasn't just a farm. It was a promise kept. A little girl's drawing turned into a national symbol of compassion. A prince's quiet act that reshaped how an entire estate viewed its land. And in the heart of it all, a man who once feared losing everything stood still, looked out over the fields, and whispered to the wind. Thank you for listening. We are home. Sometimes what saves a life isn't a miracle. It's a seed. A small seed planted in quiet soil, watered with memory, patience, and hope. And sometimes that seed grows, not into profit, not into progress as we often define it, but into something far more powerful, belonging. Thomas Bell was never just fighting for a piece of land. He was fighting for a promise, to his wife, to his daughter, to the generations of hands that had touched that soil and called it home. When a system said, "You're just a tenant," he said, "No, this land knows my name." And then someone listened. Not a committee, not a policy, but a prince. Prince William didn't arrive with a press team or a prepared statement. He arrived with boots on the ground and a heart open enough to say, "Tell me your story." And when he listened, truly listened, something extraordinary happened. A man's dream, once buried beneath bureaucracy and time, was unearthed, dusted off, and planted in a place where it could finally grow. Now Bell Farm isn't just surviving. It's thriving. Children learn where carrots come from. Teachers teach where roots are real. And a little girl named Elsie teaches everyone what it means to honor the past by nurturing the future. Here at Royal Kindness Stories, we believe in tales like this. Not just because they warm the heart, but because they remind us what leadership should look like. Leadership that listens, that remembers, that opens gates, not to remove people, but to invite them in. If this story touched you, if you felt something stir when Elsie stood beneath that tree, or when Thomas read those words from the prince, then stay with us. Subscribe to Royal Kindness Stories, the channel where modern-day miracles bloom in the most unexpected places. Where the crown doesn't sit on a pedestal but walks into barns, bends under trees, and kneels in gardens. Share your thoughts in the comments below. Have you ever had to fight for something you loved? Have you ever been heard when you didn't think anyone was listening? We read every word because every story matters, especially yours. And turn on the bell so you don't miss the next chapter, because the next story might be the one that reminds you you're not alone. You're not forgotten. And there's still goodness in this world worth standing for. So keep planting, keep believing, and above all, let kindness reign. We'll see you in the next story. Until then, let the fields keep blooming. Let the voices keep rising. Let the hearts keep listening.